Ethan Carter stood tall in the Grand Hall of the Scifi Empire, representing Earth in a crucial diplomatic meeting. He had spent years preparing for first contact with an alien civilization, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to happen. The Scifi were a race of towering, elegant beings with shimmering blue skin and golden eyes. They were known across the galaxy as warriors and conquerors, but today's meeting was about peace. Standing before Ethan was Princess Soraya Xalvani, daughter of the Emperor, and the key figure in this negotiation. Ethan smiled politely and did what any human would do when meeting someone important. He extended his hand for a handshake. The hall fell silent. Hundreds of alien nobles, warriors, and advisors gasped in shock. The Emperor's expression hardened. Princess Soraya's golden eyes widened, and for a brief moment she hesitated. Then, as if bound by some invisible force, she slowly raised her hand and clasped Ethan's in return. A second wave of gasps filled the chamber. A few nobles whispered to each other, their voices tense and urgent. Others looked furious, as if Ethan had just committed a terrible crime. Ethan frowned. Did I do something wrong? One of the Scifi advisors, a tall and stern-looking alien named Lord Voker, stepped forward. His voice was cold. Human, do you understand what you have just done? Ethan glanced at Soraya, who looked just as surprised as he was. I was just offering a handshake. It's a human greeting. The Emperor, a powerful figure with deep blue skin and sharp golden eyes, leaned forward on his throne. A handshake, you say? His voice carried both authority and amusement. In our culture, such an act is not a simple greeting. Human. Ethan felt a knot forming in his stomach. Then, what does it mean? Soraya took a slow breath, composing herself. It is an ancient tradition, Ethan Carter. Among our people, clasping hands with another is the highest form of commitment. It is a bond that signifies unity, loyalty, and a promise of family. Ethan's eyes widened. Wait. Are you saying? Voker's expression darkened. You have just proposed marriage to the princess of the Scifi Empire. The words hit Ethan like a thunderbolt. His mind raced. Marriage. But that was just a handshake. He turned to Soraya, hoping she would correct them, that she would explain this was a misunderstanding. But she remained silent, her face unreadable. Why didn't she pull her hand away? The Emperor's deep voice filled the room once more. And my daughter accepted. Ethan's mouth went dry. Wait, hold on. I didn't mean it like that. It was just a handshake. The Emperor raised a hand, and the hall fell silent again. Intentions do not matter. In the eyes of the Scifi, the bond has been formed. Soraya finally spoke, her voice softer. It is true. In our history, no Scifi has ever withdrawn from this tradition without bringing great shame upon themselves and their family. Ethan's heart pounded. This couldn't be happening. He had just caused a galactic diplomatic disaster with a simple gesture. One of Earth's diplomats, standing in the corner of the hall, rushed forward. Surely there's a way to resolve this misunderstanding peacefully. The Emperor considered this for a moment. Then he spoke. There is only one way. The human must honor the tradition. He will prove himself as a worthy mate for my daughter. If he succeeds, he will take his rightful place at her side. If he fails, he will not leave this palace alive. Ethan felt the weight of every eye in the hall staring at him. He had come here to secure peace between Earth and the Scifi. Now his own survival depended on winning the heart of an alien princess, or facing whatever fate the Empire had in store for him. And judging by the smirk growing on Soraya's face, this was only the beginning. Ethan Carter stood frozen in the Grand Hall of the Scifi Empire, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Married to an alien princess just because of a handshake. The Emperor's deep voice echoed across the chamber. The bond has been made, but a bond alone is not enough. He leaned forward, his golden eyes piercing through Ethan. A Scifi warrior must prove their worth. If you are to be with my daughter, you must face the trials. Trials. Ethan's stomach tightened. He had no idea what these trials were, but judging by the smirks of the alien nobles around him, they were not going to be easy. Ethan took a deep breath. And if I refuse? Lord Voker, the Emperor's top advisor, stepped forward. Then you will be seen as a dishonorable coward, unworthy of life. No man who disrespects the Salvani royal family is allowed to leave this world alive. Ethan clenched his jaw. Great. So it was either pass the trials or die. Princess Soraya remained silent beside him, her expression unreadable. Then, finally, she spoke. The trials are not meant to kill you, if you are strong. Her golden eyes locked onto his. Are you? Ethan straightened his back. He didn't come this far just to get executed over a handshake. He exhaled sharply. All right. I'll do it. The hall murmured in approval, and the Emperor nodded. Then let the first trial begin. The trial of strength. Ethan found himself in a massive arena, surrounded by thousands of Zalvani spectators. The walls were decorated with ancient carvings, depicting warriors in battle. The air was tense, filled with excitement and expectation. Soraya stood near the edge of the arena, her arms crossed. This is the trial of strength, she explained. You must prove that you are not weak. Ethan sighed. Right. And how exactly do I do that? Voker smirked. You must fight. Ethan's heart dropped. Fight who? A loud growl answered his question. A massive beast, twice his size, covered in thick black fur with 4 muscular arms, was released from a heavy iron gate. The crowd roared in excitement as the beast stomped forward, its red eyes glowing with rage. Ethan took a step back. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Soraya spoke from the sidelines. That is a Korlak, one of our strongest war beasts. If you cannot defeat it, you are not worthy. Ethan stared at the beast as it flexed its 4 muscular arms and let out a deafening roar. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have armor. How was he supposed to fight that thing? The Korlak charged. Ethan barely dodged as it swung a massive fist toward him, the impact shaking the ground. He rolled to the side, his heart pounding. No way could he match this thing in raw power. He needed a plan. He scanned the arena. The floor was made of sand. The walls were high. There were large stone pillars placed around the battlefield. Maybe he could use them. The Korlak roared and attacked again, swiping with its massive claws. Ethan ducked under the attack and sprinted toward a pillar. The beast followed, its heavy footsteps thundering behind him. At the last second, Ethan pivoted and dodged, letting the beast slam into the pillar at full force. The Korlak staggered, disoriented. The crowd gasped. Ethan saw his chance. He grabbed a loose chunk of stone from the broken pillar and hurled it at the beast's head. It howled in rage, shaking off the attack. But Ethan wasn't done. He ran. He led the beast toward another pillar. Again, at the last second, he dodged. The Korlak crashed into the stone, cracking it even more. One more. Ethan repeated the move a 3rd time, and this time, the pillar collapsed onto the beast, burying it under heavy rubble. The arena fell silent. Then, cheers erupted. The Korlak didn't get up. Ethan, panting, looked up at Soraya. She had an amused smirk on her face. Clever. The Emperor stood from his throne. The first trial is complete. The human has proven his strength, not through brute force, but through intelligence. He nodded approvingly. Perhaps he is not as weak as I thought. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow. One trial down, but something told him the next ones would only get harder. Ethan barely had time to catch his breath after defeating the Korlak before the Emperor stood again, his voice echoing through the great hall. The human has proven his strength, but strength alone is not enough. His golden eyes locked onto Ethan. Now he must prove his honor. Ethan frowned. Honor. He had no idea what that meant in Salvani culture. Fighting a giant monster was one thing, but now he had to pass some kind of moral test. Lord Voker stepped forward, his smirk widening. The next trial will test your heart, human. If you fail, your life is forfeit. Ethan sighed. Great. Another death test. Princess Soraya watched him carefully, her arms crossed. She hadn't spoken much, but he could feel her studying him. Was she hoping he'd pass, or expecting him to fail? The Emperor raised his hand. Let the trial of honor begin. A choice of loyalty. Ethan was escorted into a circular chamber, its walls covered in ancient symbols. In the center, 3 pillars stood, each holding an object. A group of Zalvani nobles gathered around the edges, watching in silence. Soraya stepped forward and gestured toward the pillars. This trial is simple. Before you are 3 choices. Choose wisely, and your honor will be proven. Ethan stepped closer, inspecting the objects. A gleaming Zalvani war blade, its edges glowing with a faint blue light. It looked deadly, a weapon fit for a warrior. A golden crown, encrusted with jewels. It screamed power and wealth. A small tattered cloth, old and faded, with an unknown symbol stitched onto it. Voker chuckled. This test will show what you value most, human. Ethan narrowed his eyes. He didn't trust Voker. He glanced at Soraya. Her expression was unreadable, but something in her eyes told him this test wasn't what it seemed. What happens if I pick the sword? Ethan asked. Voker grinned. Then you will prove yourself a warrior, but warriors crave battle. Choosing strength means you are willing to fight for power, but never for peace. Ethan turned to the crown. And a crown. Voker's grin widened. Then you prove that you desire wealth and status above all else. You seek to rule, rather than serve. Ethan frowned. He had no interest in conquering planets or becoming an alien king. Finally, his eyes landed on the tattered cloth. And this. For the first time, Soraya spoke. Her voice was softer than before. That cloth belonged to a Zalvani warrior long ago. He was given the choice of a blade, a crown, or his duty. She looked at Ethan. He chose duty. Ethan's mind raced. The first 2 choices were obvious traps. The sword meant violence. The crown meant greed. The cloth, though, it meant loyalty. Ethan reached forward and picked up the cloth. The chamber fell silent. Then, the Emperor nodded. He has chosen honor. Voker's smirk disappeared. Soraya's expression softened. You chose duty over power or greed. You understand responsibility. Ethan exhaled, relieved. He had passed. An unwanted enemy. As Ethan left the chamber, he felt Voker's cold gaze on him. The Zalvani noble stepped forward, his voice mockingly polite. You are clever, human, but do not think for a moment that you belong here. Ethan crossed his arms. Did I do something to offend you, or do you just not like off-worlders? Voker smirked. You do not deserve to stand beside the princess. His eyes glowed with hidden anger. And I will prove it in the next trial. Ethan's stomach twisted. Next trial. Soraya approached, her gaze firm. Ignore him, Ethan. You passed the trial. That is what matters. Ethan nodded, but deep down, he knew Voker wasn't done with him yet. The next trial was coming. And this time, it wouldn't be just about honor. To be continued. This part keeps the suspense high while introducing political tension, character dynamics, and a moral challenge. Let me know if you need any adjustments. You said, Part 4 to 800 words kaleko or interesting hunachea or third-person style malekniha or simple basic English ka. Don't use any violated word, so please avoid any violated content. ChatGPT said. Part 4. The Trial of Wisdom. Ethan sat on the cold stone bench, his thoughts swirling. The trials were becoming harder and harder, and now, a new one was about to begin. He had passed the trial of strength and the trial of honor, but what was the trial of wisdom going to be? He had no way of knowing, But his instincts told him it wouldn't be as simple as picking a cloth or fighting a giant beast. Soraya stood beside him, her eyes focused ahead, but Ethan could sense the tension in the air. The Emperor had declared that the third trial would test his mind, his ability to think and reason. Ethan didn't feel confident. He had never been the smartest guy, but he knew he had to try. A loud horn sounded, signaling the start of the trial. Ethan stood and followed Soraya into the central arena. The crowd was silent as they entered, the atmosphere thick with expectation. Ethan scanned the arena, trying to figure out what was going on. In the center of the arena was a massive stone structure with intricate symbols carved into its surface. At its base was a large open book. "This is the trial of wisdom," Soraya explained, her voice calm but serious. "The book holds the answers to ancient Scifi riddles. To pass the trial, you must answer the riddle correctly." Ethan swallowed. Riddles? He wasn't sure he was up for this, but there was no turning back now. The Emperor's voice boomed from the throne. "Let the trial of wisdom begin." The moment the words left his lips, the stone structure began to glow. The pages of the book flipped open, revealing an ancient riddle written in an unfamiliar script. A holographic image of the riddle appeared in front of Ethan, and Soraya stepped aside, watching closely. Ethan stepped forward and stared at the words. The letters were strange, but he could make out a few symbols. The hologram shifted, translating the riddle into his language. "I speak without a voice. I hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with the wind. What am I?" Ethan frowned. The answer seemed simple at first. He glanced at Soraya, hoping she would offer a hint, but her expression was unreadable. "Think." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the question swirl in his mind. What spoke without a voice, heard without ears, and came alive with the wind? Then it clicked. "An echo," he said, stepping forward with more confidence. The stone structure shuddered, and the holographic riddle vanished. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but then the book flipped open again, revealing another riddle. "I can be cracked, made, told, and played. What am I?" Ethan groaned. This was getting more complicated. He stared at the riddle, trying to figure out the answer. He paced around the structure, muttering the words under his breath. After a moment, he slapped his hand to his forehead. "A joke," he exclaimed. "It's a joke." Once again, the structure shuddered and the riddle disappeared. Ethan wiped his brow in relief, but then the final riddle appeared. This one was different. It wasn't just words, it was a puzzle Ethan had never seen before. The puzzle consisted of shifting pieces, each with a unique symbol. Ethan stared at it, knowing that this was the last test. He had to solve it to pass. The crowd was completely silent as he began to work on the puzzle. He moved the pieces carefully, watching as the symbols shifted and clicked into place. Some of the pieces seemed to fit, but others didn't. Time seemed to stretch as Ethan worked, his heart racing with each move. He could feel the eyes of the entire arena on him, the pressure mounting with every second. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ethan placed the last piece into place. The puzzle clicked, and a loud chime echoed through the arena. The puzzle revealed a glowing symbol in the center, a mark of completion. The crowd erupted into applause, but Ethan was too exhausted to celebrate. He had done it. He had passed the trial of wisdom. Soraya stepped forward, her eyes shining with pride. "You have proven your intellect, Ethan," she smiled. "You solved all 3 riddles." Ethan nodded, still catching his breath. "I guess I got lucky." The Emperor's voice came from the throne. "The human has passed the trial of wisdom. He has proven his strength, honor, and now his mind. He may be the one to bond with my daughter." Ethan felt a strange sense of accomplishment, but he knew the trials were not over yet. There were still more to face, and the final test was still ahead. Ethan had completed the first 3 trials, but something still felt off. The tension in the air was thick as he followed Soraya through the long corridors of the palace. His hands were still shaking from the last test, the trial of wisdom, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever came next. Soraya remained silent beside him, her expression unreadable. Ethan glanced at her but didn't speak. She had been his guide through the trial so far, but there was something about her that seemed distant. She had been watching him closely, but what did she really think of him? Finally, they reached a large chamber. It was beautifully decorated with shimmering tapestries and floating orbs of light. In the center of the room stood a small pedestal on which lay a single red rose, its petals glowing softly in the dim light. Soraya turned to face him, her voice soft but serious. "This is the trial of the heart." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Heart." Soraya nodded. "You have proven your strength, honor, and wisdom, but now you must prove your heart. The rose represents love, loyalty, and sacrifice. To pass this trial, you must choose what you value most." Ethan was confused. He had been through battles, riddles, and moral tests, but love, was this really the test? Soraya stepped back, her gaze focused on the rose. "You must take the rose, but there is a price." The petals of the rose shimmered as she spoke. "If you take it, you will have to leave something behind. Your answer will reveal your true feelings. Do you choose love and loyalty, or will you sacrifice it all for power?" Ethan stepped closer to the pedestal, his fingers brushing against the soft petals. The rose pulsed under his touch as though it were alive. He glanced up at Soraya, who stood watching him silently. "What happens if I choose wrong?" he asked, his voice tense. Soraya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned away and walked to the side of the room, her back to him. "The consequences of the trial are not so simple," she said quietly. "But if you choose poorly, you may lose everything you've gained so far." Ethan swallowed hard. Losing everything. The weight of her words pressed down on him. He stared at the rose, unsure of what to do. This trial wasn't about brute strength or clever riddles. This trial was about the heart, something he wasn't sure he fully understood. The room seemed to grow colder as Ethan thought. What did he truly value? The rose before him was a symbol of love and loyalty, but what did that mean for him? He had never thought much about love. His life had been about survival, about pushing forward, and protecting those he cared about. But now, in this alien world, everything was different. His mind wandered to Soraya. She had been by his side through everything, guiding him, helping him. And yet, she was still distant, unsure of where she stood with him. She had spoken of loyalty and sacrifice, but was that something he could give in return? The rose in front of him seemed to shimmer in the light, its petals now glowing more brightly. The longer he stared, the more he realized that this trial wasn't just about choosing love. It was about choosing his future. The rose represented a path, a choice between loyalty to Soraya, to this alien world, and the chance to return to his own. Finally, Ethan made up his mind. He wasn't sure if it was the right choice, but it felt like the only one. He reached forward, gently grasping the stem of the rose. As he did, the room shifted. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and the walls seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. The petals of the rose glowed brighter, casting shadows that danced on the walls. Soraya turned sharply, her eyes wide in shock. "You chose the rose?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded slowly. "I chose love." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the air around him vibrated, and the rose disintegrated into a shower of glowing light. The pedestal vanished, and in its place stood a glowing portal. Soraya stepped forward, her eyes still wide with disbelief. "The portal. It is a path that only opens for those who choose love over all else. You have passed the trial." Ethan looked at the portal, his heart racing. He had done it. He had passed yet another trial. But now he had to face the consequences of his choice. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing. This trial wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Soraya, too. Soraya's gaze softened, and she took a step closer to him. The trials are nearly over. The final test awaits. But remember, the path you choose now may change everything. Ethan looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. The trials were almost finished, but what came next would be the hardest test yet. The soft hum of the portal echoed in the chamber as Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The trials had been grueling, each one pushing him beyond his limits. But now, the final test awaited. He could feel it in the air, the tension, the weight of what was to come. Soraya stood beside him, her face calm, though her eyes betrayed a hint of anxiety. She had been with him through every challenge, guiding him, pushing him to do his best. And now, it seemed like the moment of truth had arrived. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Ethan nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. He wasn't entirely sure what the final trial would be, but he knew it would be unlike anything he had faced before. The portal shimmered in front of him, its glow pulling him in, as though beckoning him to step through. He hesitated for only a moment before he took a deep breath and walked forward, his foot crossing the threshold. The world around him shifted instantly. The bright, glowing room faded away, replaced by an alien landscape that seemed both familiar and completely new. The ground beneath his feet was soft and spongy, and towering trees with silver leaves reached toward a deep blue sky. The air was thick with the scent of alien flowers, their colors shifting from purple to gold with every breeze. Ethan glanced around, his senses heightened. It was beautiful here, but also eerie. The sky was darker than he had expected, and the atmosphere felt charged, as if something momentous was about to happen. "Welcome to the final trial," a deep voice boomed from above. Ethan looked up to see a massive figure descending from the sky. It was the Emperor, his alien form now larger than ever, his body surrounded by swirling energy. He landed gently in front of Ethan, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly intensity. "This trial will test not only your strength, wisdom, and heart, but your very will to survive," the Emperor declared, his voice echoing in Ethan's mind. "You have come far, human, but the true challenge is yet to come." Ethan braced himself. He had faced countless dangers, but now he was facing something far more uncertain. This trial wasn't just about completing challenges. It was about surviving whatever the Emperor had in store for him. The Emperor raised his hand, and the ground beneath Ethan's feet trembled. The trees swayed, and the sky darkened, as if the planet itself were reacting to the Emperor's power. "The final test," the Emperor continued, "will require you to face your deepest fears." Before Ethan could respond, the world around him shifted again. The air turned cold, and the sky turned blood red. He found himself standing alone on a desolate battlefield, surrounded by smoke and destruction. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of battle, the clash of weapons, and the screams of the fallen. He looked down at his hands, realizing that they were covered in blood. He stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But as he looked around, he saw the faces of people he had known, people he had lost, lying motionless on the ground. His father, his friends, even people he had never met. All dead, all victims of his failure. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of guilt crushed him. He had never felt so alone, so powerless. He wanted to scream, to run, to escape this nightmare. "This is your fear," the Emperor's voice echoed in his mind. "Your greatest fear is that you are not enough, that you will lose those you care about." Ethan gritted his teeth. He had lost so much already. Could he survive this? Could he pass this trial? But as he stood there, shaking, he heard a voice. Soft, comforting. "Ethan." He turned, his heart racing, and saw Soraya standing before him, her eyes full of concern. "You're not alone," she said gently, stepping forward. You have people who care about you. You've already proven that you are strong enough. Her words cut through the fear, and for a moment, Ethan felt the weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't alone. He had proven himself in every trial. This final test was no different. Ethan took a deep breath and straightened his back. "I'm not afraid of losing anymore," he said firmly, turning his gaze back to the battlefield. "I'm not going to let my fear control me." The world around him shifted again. The battlefield disappeared, and the desolate landscape was replaced by the serene, alien world they had first entered. The trees stood tall, the sky was blue once more, and the air felt warm and safe. "You have passed the final trial," the Emperor's voice said, now softer, almost approving. "You have faced your fear and overcome it. Your heart, your mind, and your strength have proven you worthy." Ethan stood tall, his heart still racing but filled with a sense of accomplishment. He had done it. He had faced his deepest fears and come out stronger on the other side. Soraya approached him, a proud smile on her face. "You did it." Ethan looked at her, his breath steadying. He had made it through all the trials, but what came next would be the ultimate test. The Emperor's voice echoed one last time. "The trials are complete. You have earned the right to decide your future, Ethan." Ethan looked at Soraya and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The air was thick with anticipation as Ethan stood before the Emperor, the weight of his trials behind him. He had faced his fears, survived the challenges, and proven himself worthy. Now, the moment had arrived. The final decision would shape the future, not just for him, but for everyone involved. Soraya stood by his side, her presence a calming force. The bond between them had only grown stronger through the trials. She had believed in him when he had doubted himself, and now she was his anchor as they faced the final challenge together. The Emperor, towering and majestic, watched them with a gaze that felt both distant and all-knowing. His eyes shimmered with the power of the ancient alien race, yet there was something else in them, a respect, perhaps, for the human who had defied all odds. "You have completed the trials, human," the Emperor's voice boomed. "But the true test is not in strength, wisdom, or endurance. The final test is a choice that will define not just your fate, but the fate of your world and ours." Ethan's heart raced as the Emperor's words sank in. What could this final choice be? What was it that could shape the future of both their worlds? The Emperor raised a hand, and the world around them began to shift. The ground beneath their feet grew softer, and the sky above darkened. A vision appeared, showing two possible futures. One was a world of peace, where humans and aliens lived in harmony, united by their shared experiences. The other was a world of conflict, where war raged between the two species, each side fighting for dominance, with no end in sight. The choice was clear, but was it that simple? "You see the consequences of your decision," the Emperor said, his voice heavy. "If you choose peace, there will be sacrifices. Some will not accept it, and there will be challenges that will test the very fabric of your species. But if you choose conflict, there will be no turning back. The war will be endless, and all you fought for will be lost." Ethan felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Peace or war? It was a choice that no one could take lightly, especially after everything he had been through. But he knew deep down that peace was the only way forward. He had seen the destruction caused by war, and he had felt the pain of loss. He didn't want that for the future. He couldn't allow it. He looked at Soraya, her eyes filled with understanding. She had always been by his side, guiding him, showing him the strength of her people. But she also knew the truth. They were both fighting for something greater than themselves. Their love, their bond, was a symbol of what could be achieved if peace was chosen. "I choose peace," Ethan said, his voice steady and strong. "We've already seen what war can do. I won't let the future be shaped by hatred and bloodshed. I choose to fight for a future where we can all live together, where our children can grow up in a world free of conflict." The Emperor's eyes flickered with something that could have been approval. Slowly, he nodded. "You have chosen wisely, human," he said, his tone softer than before. "Peace is never easy to achieve, but your decision will pave the way for a new future, one where both our worlds can thrive." A wave of energy rippled through the air, and the vision of the future shifted. The world of peace began to take shape. Cities and communities of humans and aliens stood side by side, working together to build a brighter tomorrow. There was still uncertainty ahead, but there was also hope that they could find common ground and create something better than what had come before. Ethan felt a sense of relief wash over him. The decision had been made, and now it was up to them to ensure that peace would truly prevail. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that they were not alone. Together, humans and aliens could accomplish anything. Soraya stepped forward, her hand reaching for his. "We've come so far," she said softly, "but this is just the beginning. Together, we can build a future where both our peoples can thrive." Ethan smiled, the weight of the world lifting from his shoulders. "Together," he repeated, his voice filled with conviction. "We can do it." The Emperor watched them with quiet approval. "You have passed the final test," he said. "And in doing so, you have shown the true strength of your people. You are ready to lead, Ethan. But remember, leadership is not about power. It's about the choices you make and the people you choose to fight for." Ethan nodded, understanding the depth of the Emperor's words. He had learned much during his time in this alien world. He had learned that true strength didn't come from physical power or dominance, but from the ability to make difficult choices for the greater good. As the Emperor's presence faded, Ethan and Soraya were left standing in the alien landscape, the peaceful world now forming around them. The trials were over, but the real work was just beginning. Together, they would build the future, a future of peace, hope, and unity. And as the first rays of a new dawn broke across the horizon, Ethan knew one thing for certain: no matter what challenges they faced, they would face them together. The end.